Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Squawk Talk on Socialist Telly, which was one that was originally going to go out last week and got delayed. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the programme my colleague Bonnie from Socialist Telly, and we also then have Alexei Sayle, who's been a previous guest on the programme, and Paul Heron, who is a public interest lawyer who is working on the Spycops hearing. So welcome everybody on that. Thank you for your time. I was listening to Alexei Sayle's podcast I listened on YouTube, but it's available on other outlets as well, the other week, and Paul appeared on there to talk about the whole Spycops scandal in the past, but also what's going on now with the hearings and also the way things are still spinning out in the present day and the effects that's having in the society, quite worrying effects as well. So, and Paul, you contacted Alexei because you found out he had a special branch file as part of this Spycops thing originally. So give us a little bit of background on that, please.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for inviting me on Socialist Telly. I'm as you explained, I'm a lawyer who's representing a number of court participants in the undercover policing inquiry or Spycops inquiry, and in the course of researching and around the issue and getting some disclosure from the inquiry itself, I was looking at some paperwork around the Right to Work campaign, which was a big campaign in the 1970s, raising the issues of unemployment. And in the course of that research and looking at documentation, Alexei's name came up as someone who was doing a benefit gig for the Right to Work campaign at the end, probably of one of the demonstrations. And he was, it was clear that he was allocated a special branch file opened by an undercover police officer, probably at the gig. And who knows what's contained in that. So when the information then became public, which everyone can see the documentation on the Spycops or the Undercover Policing Inquiry website, I then contacted Alexei just to let him know. And then, we took it from there.
That's really interesting. So, Alexei, what did you find out about what they'd been doing with you?
Well, of course, on one level, I was delighted to find out that I did have a special branch file. It's something like a BAFTA and an Emmy, which I also have. It's another mark of the effect that you're having, I guess. So I wasn't surprised. And I think Paul said it may even have been a family file, so it may have contained. It may be the Sayle family file, so it contained my mother Molly, my father Joe, and our dog Bruno. All socialists. But on another level, I've never broken the law, and yet the police were devoting it, presumably. It can't be cheap. I think it must cost money to run a file on somebody to surveil them or whatever. And why was that happening? Really, I've never, I've no intention to break the law. So why were the police, keeping a file on me? I mean, the answer is that they're, I think the answer is probably that they see themselves as certainly part of them sees themselves as not as a force that is there to find our lost cats or keep us safe, but is to make sure that the rule of capitalism is not disturbed in any way.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not like there was any shortage of other things going on that they could have been looking into at the time, really. That came up on the program with the the National Front and the other kind of far right groups getting up to all sorts. And I think Paul, it was you who said that one of the Workers' Party or something was doing more to actually investigate what the far right was doing than the police were.
I mean, there's reports. I mean, one of the criticisms, particularly of activists who are core participants in the inquiries, of course, the predominance of monitoring of the left, you know, from CND to, you know, kind of socialist organizations and other progressive organizations. And the lack really of monitoring of the far right, who actually were committing violent offences and were, you know, involved in racist murders. Now, that's not to say I'm necessarily calling for the monitoring of this, that, or the other, but it's quite a scandal, really, that it was the left that was predominantly monitored, whilst at the same time the far right was barely touched. And the point I made was, I think it was one of the officers who were sent into the Workers' Revolutionary Party were then asked by the Workers' Revolutionary Party to monitor or infiltrate a meeting of the National Front. And as I probably jokingly recalled on the podcast, I think the Workers' Revolutionary Party did probably more to monitor the National Front at that time than the Metropolitan Police themselves, you know. So yeah, it's not good. And as you say, you know, there may actually be an argument for undercover policing and whatever, but this isn't, from my point of view, and seeing what so far has come out of the inquiry, there doesn't seem to be much of an argument really for doing it. So yeah, it's still quite a scandal, which is still developing, really.
Yes, I mean, if people are only tangentially aware of all this stuff going on, probably have an impression of, you know, I think as Alexei described it, you know, people growing their hair long and sitting at the back to make a few notes, but it went way beyond that, didn't it? I mean, you
that's right.
Quite a shocking example.
That's right. I mean, just for those who are not aware, it's an organisation was set up by the Metropolitan Police called the Special Demonstration Squad. We'll call it the SDS just for short. And the SDS in '68 was set up because of the public order or disorder that took place during the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign. And the initial idea was that police officers grow their hair long, dress a bit scruffy, and sit in the back of the meetings and take a few notes, whether that's Vietnam Solidarity Campaign meetings, the IMG, etc. But very quickly, it turned to police officers in the early 70s taking positions in those same organizations. So those organizations be the Troops Out movement, the SWP, or the International Socialists as they were, the IMG, the Communist Party of England, or various formations. And they were taking positions, though. And in the case of the Troops Out movement, I represented a client who was spied on by an officer called Rick Gibson. That was his cover name. And he became, at one point, the national organizer of the Troops Out movement for I think a 6 to 8 month period. So there you have an officer as basically the organizer or the derailer, if you like, of the Troops Out movement. You even had one officer elected as the deputy president of the Students' Union at Thames Polytechnic. Such was the predominance of the. But they were, you know, they were all over different organisations. And as Alexei absolutely correctly said, nobody was doing anything illegal. They were organising, they were petitioning, they were campaigning, and you know, there doesn't seem to be any kind of, you know, full-on criminal illegal activity. It's this, as probably many of the people who are watching, Alexei, yourself, have been involved in. It's knocking on doors, petitioning, and all the rest of it. And you could have a police officer standing next to you, long hair, doing the kind of same thing, and you just kind of think, what's the point? You know.
I think, of course, also the danger is that when police officers take senior positions. Well, there's several things that they, in order to try and kind of reinforce their authority, they will urge the organization itself to, to do things, to do more and more aggressive things. And of course, they will be turn into agents provocateurs often, and will actually, either to reinforce their authority, I think, or to, in the end, give the organization a bad name. They will be the ones who are urging the organization to commit illegal acts, I think.
Yeah.
Some evidence of that, isn't there?
If you got heckled at one of your shows, then Alexei, we know what was going on now, don't we? But yeah, Paul, you brought out a very concrete example of this that was quite shocking in terms of the incitement to commit criminal acts.
Yeah,
was coming actually from.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. There is a report. There was a report in the Guardian, I think 2 or 3 years ago, by a journalist called Rob Evans, who, as probably you know, and other people who are watching know, wrote a book called Undercover, it's an excellent book of the tradecraft of undercover officers, and he covered a report where 2 anti-fascists were encouraged by one of the undercover officers to potentially firebomb a charity shop run by a guy called Robert Fiore, who was an Italian fascist, and had run like this kind of ultra-right Catholic charity and had a shop in London. And obviously the people involved were we're not going to do that. That's crazy. That's just madness. And that's a clear example of what Alexei is saying. But I think that's quite an extreme example. I think there's much more potentially lower level stuff which will come out. But of course, there are other scandals involved, which in Alexei's podcast, which featured Helen Steele, the scandal of officers, in order to make sure that their cover wasn't blown, were currying favour and sexual relations with women to make sure that their cover wasn't blown. And there's other scandals that are part of the inquiry which have already come out and need to be properly exposed, and hopefully they will. Yeah.
Yes, it does make you wonder if there's people languishing in jail, or certainly they spent time in jail, that may have been put up to whatever it was they got convicted of by an undercover police officer, which is quite a shocking thought, really. And that kind of infiltration now, I'm guessing. Has any kind of kibosh been put on this by the revelations of the Spycops scandal, or do you think they've just basically gone even deeper underground to try and keep it out of sight and get on with it without scrutiny?
I think the scandals will come out because, of course, the officers have been already exposed by journalists. So there's been a number of officers who, it's already clear, did have relations with sexual relations with female activists during the course. And we also know that during the course of the inquiry, for instance, officers used the identities of dead children to make, to develop their own identity. So if their name was Joseph Smith, they'd look for a child called Joseph who had the same birthday as them, and it was like sort of like a John le Carré novel, where they kind of developed. They went into Charlotte House as it was, got the birth certificate, got the death certificate, and worked their way from there. That's an absolute outrage, and obviously it's possibly re-traumatized families who lost children at 3, 4, and 5, and that's already been a feature of the inquiry, and has certainly been featured by, amongst other newspapers, The Guardian, The Independent, etc. And I think that's going to become more and more of an issue as the inquiry goes along.
That's a well-known tactic by criminals as well, isn't it, for identity theft and impersonations and so on?
That's right.
So yes. They're using criminal tactics to infiltrate a group that's not doing anything criminal.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, Helen details that, it's extra. I mean, just the crime really of derailing somebody's life like that for this kind of idiotic, spurious kind of fantasy life that they were living. Making really somebody question, question everything really, to be so thoroughly lied to by a partner who essentially doesn't exist. I mean, I think as she probably said, it makes you, it's so destabilizing really to to have somebody lie to you on that profound a level. It's really an enormous crime in itself, and the fact that the taxpayer was was paying for this kind of psychological warfare in a sense. Is
yes. Were any children born as a result of any of
extraordinary.
these relationships? I mean, that was.
Say that again, sorry.
Were any children born as a result of these relationships?
Yeah, well, Paul can probably detail.
Yeah, there were. Yeah, there were. I think at least one, possibly two. But yeah, they were. And as Alexei said quite rightly, it's these officers were underground or had their identity changed for 4 years. So they were in somebody's life for 2, 3, or 4 of those years. And at the end of their tour of duty, they would then just disappear, like fake a crisis, and leaving their partners, the activists, the female activists, if you like, thinking, well, what's happened, and worried about them. I mean, it's it's an absolute
and literally holding the baby.
Yeah, in some cases, yeah, but absolutely scandalous. But being involved in somebody's life on that level as well, going to family parties or funerals or whatever, it's quite scandalous, and it's even hard. It's quite hard to believe even now that it would stoop to some levels. And then, of course, the additional scandal we have is the additional issue of blacklisting of people as a result of the kind of spying, potentially being blacklisted during the course as a result of it. And
so is this separate or part of the same thing in terms of, obviously there was the industrial blacklisting where the companies were colluding to keep people off that they felt might cause trouble,
well, the actual,
etc.
What Paul said to me was that the officers in that unit were actually colluding with building firms, for instance, to pass them information about people that they thought would be a threat, really. And it was, when you think about there was a lot of, if you think of the building industry back in the 60s, the lump and all that, when it was, unregulated, the death toll was enormous, and these trade unionists were campaigning for greater safety, really, to stop people being killed and stop people being economically exploited. And the police were passing on the details of those people to the employers, who then blacklisted them. I think that's the case, is it not, Paul?
Absolutely, I think that sums it up perfectly. And we have the position where, of course, people have got files, and the Metropolitan Police or the SDS Special Branch are meeting with MI5. And that information, who knows how it was used, but certainly what Alexei is saying is correct. There's a fantastic book by Dave Smith called Blacklisted, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and people who are watching have probably got themselves. Really spells out the effects of blacklisting on people's lives, and people who got their files were, quite shocked to know the kind of detail that the organisations like the Consultant Association had. But there's certainly allegations that the Blacklist Support Group are making that say the Metropolitan Police were, feeding information between, first of all, the Economic League and the Metropolitan Police, and then later the Consulting Association and the Metropolitan Police. And I think that book, Dave Smith's book, outlines that really, really well, with really good evidence. And I think in tranche, so the inquiry split into 6 tranches of the first part. And we're now in tranche 1, which is 1968 to 82. Tranche 2 is 83, I think, to about 92. And then tranche 3 is 92 or 93 to early 2000s. And it's in tranche 3 that the blacklisting, the construction, the construction blacklist, which Alexei talks about, is going to be featured. But blacklisting was going on well even before then. And I think it's already been raised. We've certainly raised it on behalf of one of our clients who found it who's involved in the Troops Out movement, who found it virtually impossible to get a job after being targeted by this particular officer, Rick Gibson. And we've raised it with the inquiry to really look into it. He was a well-educated.
How long's that been going on so far then? Because if you're still in tranche 1, it sounds like it's
So the inquiry's been going on for about 5 years now. We've only been taking evidence for about a year, and then we're due to take tranche 1, part 3 is due to take place in May, and that's looking at some of the managers, and also one civilian witness, Lindsay German, is due to give evidence. Tranche 2 is not due, we think, to start until probably not until 2024. There's a big gap, and then it runs through from 2024 for about 2 solid years. But yeah, we're still on tranche 1, so we're still in 68 to 82, and that's where Alexei's name came up.
I mean, all of this is so concerning because we're supposedly governed by consent or policed by consent. And what we're seeing time after time is the people that we're supposed to consent to governing us all are actually abusing that position of power and that trust. And that then has ramifications for how much respect and how much consent people are prepared to give these bodies. I mean, we're coming up to the anniversary of the Sarah Everard murder by a police officer, so they're not covering themselves in glory still.
That's right. I mean, that's
quite a lot of evidence as well. There's quite a lot of evidence as well that some of them, I think, like Rick Gibson, of course, they were promoted, weren't they? Later, they then went on to be senior uniformed or detective officers. They were rewarded with promotion for their shenanigans.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right, Alexei. There was a whole layer of them promoted, and some of them became managers in the SDS squad and went on to senior positions, and played quite a leading role. It's a real concern, and I think the point that you made, Bonnie, was really interesting, because one of the things that we raised in our last opening statement was how high it actually went up, the whole operation. And we raised that we think Robert Armstrong, who was the senior civil servant to the cabinet and the prime minister over 2 governments, was approving the budget, and the commissioners actually visited the SDS safe house during the 70s as well to say you're doing a great job. So it wasn't just rogue officers going off on a frolic. We're talking about senior civil servants and prime ministers knowing about this. So it's not just low level kind of officers going a bit crazy.
It's state-sanctioned abuse against women is what it comes down to at the end of the day. And time again, women are the people that bear the brunt of these decisions. So, you're already at risk walking the streets after dark because you're a woman. And then the very people you're supposed to be able to trust, the police, the politicians, the civil servants, are actually using your vulnerability against you and infiltrating your lives. I mean, it doesn't get much more serious than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's state-sanctioned abuse of women. It's state-sanctioned monitoring of the labour and trade union movements. It's state-sanctioned monitoring of people who may be potentially peripheral maybe just going to gigs or going and that's the kind of level that so far we can already see from the disclosure, which is already available to many people that they can look at on the UCPI website itself. The disclosure which is available is already of a great concern, and I'm sure that as we go through it, the crucial thing is to keep our eyes on it. Things that Socialist Telly, podcasts, and various other things, because for many of us, we can't. People like myself who may see disclosure, we can't say anything about it until it's actually uploaded on the inquiry website because of restriction orders. But you're absolutely right, Bonnie. It's state-sanctioned monitoring abuse, and it's been signed off at the highest levels. It's not a few rogue officers doing things which are wrong. Yeah.
It does make you wonder as well how much that kind of institutionalized contempt for people's rights, and particularly for women, has fed into the situation that has come to light in the last year or two, with the murders by police officers and this kind of stuff as well. That if your flaw is a level of thinking you can abuse women in one way, then that, is it that big a step to for individual officers to think they're entitled to do something else?
It's an enormous abuse of power.
And I mean, on that same topic, Alexei, you raised during your podcast about the racist aspects of all of this as well. So, I mean, I don't think you got a chance to go very much into it, but why don't you tell us
which
what you were raising? How you see? Well, you said that there was a kind of a racism inherent in the whole way that they were behaving then and now in terms of stop and search.
Well, yeah, I think that. I mean, again, yeah, I think I can't remember what I said now. I don't, it's all a blur when I do the podcast. But yeah, I think that I don't know. The whole question is, which sort of interests me, is really what are the police for? Really, what's their? Well, there's. I mean, it's. They're a strange organization in a way. I mean, I think in some ways they are. It's also an organization that's not been ever reformed, really. It's this weird kind of Victorian steampunk organization, and you kind of look at the various, the multiple levels of rank, for instance, detective, constable, inspector, superintendent, deputy constable, there are, I think, there are some like 34 different ranks and stuff in the police. So sometimes people don't know who's their boss, really. It's the assistant commissioner, deputy constable ranks above the superintendent. So, I mean, on that level. And then, of course, it attracts, I guess it attracts people with authoritarian views that the people are, tend to be drawn, I think, to, those kind of organizations, and then they also, they're racist. I mean, it's partly, I suppose, that attitude of behaving like an occupying army, really, and certainly keeping down a rebellious ethnic population to some extent, that they obviously saw themselves as enforcing a kind of racist kind of attitudes on people in the ghettos, really, in black neighborhoods and stuff.
Well, I'd say it's a fair bet that you're going to end up with a disproportionate amount of attention getting put onto organizations like the Black Lives Matter movement, on the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, other groups that are regarded as kind of antithetical to the to the establishment, and not doing anything criminal, but simply aiming for something that doesn't suit the people the police would see themselves as there to serve, I guess.
And of course, they've just been given a load more powers with the crime and sentencing bill.
Well, this is where I'm going with that now, because obviously it's not just a historical thing. We've got the Spycops law last year that gave them impunity for crimes committed while undercover, etc. As I understand it, I mean, Paul is our legal expert. Give us a quick rundown as to what those laws meant, because
I mean,
obviously we want to make sure we
just before I do that, Steve, I mean, I think Alexei made a good point. I mean, what's significant about who has become a core participant, has been granted core participant status at the inquiry, includes a number of family justice campaigns, and they're predominantly Black British or Asian families who have lost loved ones, often in police custody. And so you certainly have certainly already featured in a number of newspapers the fact that there was an officer who was using the cover of an anti-racist campaign to spy on the Lawrence family, for instance, which, when you think of the whole history of that murder and the subsequent failure investigation and charging, etc., is an absolute scandal. But even if you go back to even the tranche that we're in at the moment, there was an officer called Jeff Wallace who became the Flame organizer. Now, Flame was a black newspaper, I think predominantly printed by SWP members. And he was one of the three organizers of an anti-Nazi League carnival. I don't know which one, or whether it was in the Brixton Carnival or the Hackney Carnival, the one in Victoria Park. But he was like central to organizing the carnival. And so there's an obsession there by the police. And it does come from a culture, and as Alexei says, by its failures and foundation. And there's almost an empire mentality to the way policing should be run, both then and now. And I think it's significant. But in terms of the policing bill, well, the Chiz bill, if you like, well, there's two bills going through, or I think the Chiz bill's gone through. The idea of covert human intelligence sources and undercover officers effectively being given a carte blanche to not only break the law, but also, if necessary, to commit and be pardoned for murder, if necessary, during the course of their undercover. And this is what this government has brought in. And the policing bill, which is basically gives the policing carte blanche to arrest anybody who's near a demonstration that they feel is, can be, subject to search, subject to, willful obstruction of a highway, of locking on, the old suffragettes kind of tactic of locking themselves to a gate or whatever. And it's not so much the arrest, it's the fact that it gives the courts the option to sentence somebody to up to 51 weeks in prison. I mean, it's quite shocking when you think about it. If you take the Chiz bill, which amended, I think, the investigatory powers bill, the police bill, and I think there's a bill, or there's a consultation on the Official Secrets Act, making that tighter. It's quite a barrage of legislation, isn't it?
I think that, it is this government, particularly because it is in some ways it's socially, or pretends to be socially liberal, but at its core is politically amazing, tremendously authoritarian. They really are rolling back a lot of the threadbare protections that we had anyway, that they are enthusiastically gone. And it's kind of semi-fascist, really. It's profoundly disturbing, the powers that they are planning to give themselves, really. I also wonder a bit, I should say, I'm sometimes ambiguous about the police, because there is another, I think there is another kind of person who joins the police because they want to help, they want to be a kind of, genuinely, that they're drawn to, they want to care for people, they want to protect people. And I think that, and to a degree, they occasionally function, they manage to function. But I can't remember if it was you, Paul, or, they still, they're obviously besmirched by the other the cops who do this kind of thing, but also there's also when they go back to the station, there's a kind of a culture of cover up, I think, and kind of reactionary culture in the station itself, which even if they are most liberal, caring individuals, that when they go into that station, they're kind of overwhelmed by a kind of reactionary culture, I suspect.
Can good intentions survive that kind of culture? I mean, is it or is it more or less doomed when they go in that they're going to get squeezed into that mold?
I don't know. I was talked about this a bit on the podcast. I remember a period in the sort of 90s when every single kind of cop show had the villain was always an animal rights activist, like a young Emma Thompson in a beanie cap and a kind of Murphy's donkey jacket, doing their working class accents. And I wondered sometimes whether the police had infiltrated the writing teams of Casualty and The Bill and Heartbeat or whatever, because it was so universal that and you had these kind of animal rights activists committing terrible crimes, setting fire to labs in Holby and stuff like that, which animal rights activists, I think, were almost never guilty of, I don't know. It was just, I remember that particular trope, which went on for a few years, that it was, young Daniel Craig playing a firebomb throwing hunt saboteur.
Yeah. But it's not just the control over, the amount of control we're giving the police and the government, the state, the prime minister, whoever. We're also giving a lot of power to people who host platforms, social media, Twitter, Facebook, what have you. There are an awful lot of good activists that get their accounts closed down or suspended very, very regularly. And whilst I didn't want to hear from Donald Trump on Twitter, I think denying a person's right to post stuff out there is worrying, because it means someone's acting as judge and jury over what information gets out there. And I'm not at all comfortable with that. We need to have freedom of speech.
Well, it's a whole broader thing there, isn't it? Basically about that the right to offend has been more or less eroded away, and the social media platforms even will take it on themselves to be judge and jury and that kind of thing. We've got a couple of comments in from people. I have a quick question first from Ian Wiltshire. He's asking, who wrote the book Blacklisted that you referred to earlier? Was that Dave Smith?
Yeah, that was Dave Smith and Phil Chamberlain. So it was joint authors, and it's a really good read. It's not an academic. It's well researched, but it's not. It's not written as an academic tome, but it's packed full of really good examples, from starting with how the Shrewsbury pickets were set up, right the way through to the actions that the Blacklist support group took against the major construction industry. It's a really worthwhile book to get.
That's super. And we've got this in from Robert. He says, what do we expect to come out of the inquiry? Will any heads roll? If so, will it be the people who sanctioned all of this or the underlings that carried it out? What do you reckon?
Really good question. I mean, I think a number of activists have made one point really well, who are core participants, and that is, we don't expect anything from this inquiry. However, if we rock or shake the tree enough, we might get information which might be useful for other people to know. So if we get that, that will be worth it in itself. Who knows what will come out of it? Who knows? But if we get information, that would be the best. It'll equip, hopefully, future generations or whatever, at least us to understand. And maybe out of the inquiry, there'll be, further campaigns to reform or strengthen the demands to, kind of resource the police differently. Because I think Alexei's right. I mean, there are some officers who go into the police wanting to do well, but the culture tarnishes them, and the way they act going forward is tarnished. And I think there needs to be a root and branch overhaul with a lot more community control or community say in how the police is run, because at the moment they are, as Alexei quite rightly puts out, almost like an untouchable organisation that gets away with, all kinds,
Yes. Richard has come on and said the unrest in the UK has gone on for too long. We need to turn out in big numbers to finally end Tory rule. I don't disagree with that, but the question, it raises the question of what's there to replace it. If we did manage to end Tory rule, I mean, Keir Starmer seems to come very much from that same tree that needs a shake, and certainly his actions of Chiz Bill and Spycops, etc. I mean, he ordered MPs to abstain on the Chiz one, didn't he? And then had to be dragged kicking and screaming to mount any kind of opposition to this, plan to take away people's rights to protest, etc. I mean, it's
quite a turn up for the old book, in it, in a way, when the leader of the Labour Party is a former director of public prosecutions, which is not, which is really a role that again is about ensuring the power of the state, really, in the state's interests. It's not about protecting the little person. It's he's an agent of the kind of establishment, really, and he should end up as the Labour Party, leader of the Labour Party.
I mean, the stuff around the policing bill, the fact that the policing bill is a major attack on the right to protest and to assemble and to do, politicians will go on about, the suffragettes, how marvellous they were, or even in the Labour movement, quite rightly, we'll talk about, the actions in Cable Street and all the rest of it. But it is a massive attack on the right to protest. I mean, the impact of potentially 51 weeks for just potentially turning up on a demonstration, or civil, peaceful protest of locking on and things like that. I mean, it really is an absolute scandal. What the Lords tried to amend it, but of course the government's just not interested in that. And you wonder whether the reason they're doing it is because they can see things coming in the future, and it's a way of trying to cut across that. I don't know.
Yes, I mean, well, it's they're setting a very low bar in it as well, aren't they? Because I mean, certainly, at least as it's been presented, it's simply being annoying, being annoying while you're protesting, or inconveniencing anybody while you're protesting, which is surely the point.
Yeah,
is enough to make it a criminal offence, and so they really do seem to be trying to make it anything more than kind of a silent protest, waving a few candles or your smartphone light or something in the corner out of the way is going to be at risk of being broken up by the police and people getting arrested and banged up.
And at the moment, quite rightly, we're saying on the TV, look at these marvelous people in Moscow and St. Petersburg protesting against the war. This is look at how the Russians look at how the Russian state police are treating it. Oh, but by the way, we'll pass through this legislation. I mean, you just couldn't make it up.
Well, it's
and
when they
the
go on and talk
opposition
about
isn't
democracy.
opposing it. It's terrifying, I think.
Yeah, they talk about democracy and they have no interest in democracy. But
I've got to go, guys. So
yeah, thanks, Alexei. Really appreciate your time on that.
Yeah,
so, enjoy the rest of the evening.
Yeah. So
take care. And don't forget to check out Alexei's podcast on YouTube. And what was your platform that you said it goes out on?
Audio Boom.
Audio Boom. So have a look for that, because it really is well worth the listen.
Audio Boom. Yeah.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers, Alexei.
Which kind of leads us into the kind of broader issues of human rights, because I mean, human rights were abused in the process of all this stuff that's in an inquiry now, but it's still going on. They just change tactics and do what they can. But you reckon the Human Rights Act itself is under threat, Paul, and the Official Secrets Act is getting beefed up to penalise.
The Official Secrets Act is looking at particularly stifling journalists. I think the Assange case is definitely informing the consultation at the moment that the government is talking about. And the Human Rights Act, they're looking to reform as well, or at least they're talking up a British Bill of Rights, which, you know, who knows what that will be. But again, it's part of a raft of legislation which is of great concern. But you know, there are, you know, I think we've got to bear in mind and not be all, you know, grin that up and down the country, you know, there are disputes which we know of, whether they're organised by Unite or some of the smaller unions like United Voices of the World or the RMT or the Independent Workers of Great Britain. There are disputes all over the place which are being successful, and I'm really positive about, speaking as a trade unionist myself, positive about the election of Sharon Graham as the General Secretary of Unite. I think that's a really positive development, and I like her style of trade unionism, which is really both militant and grassroots. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. There are things going on which are definitely against the government. And maybe this raft of legislation actually reflects a desperation. And maybe the government is anticipating things coming up as maybe things develop against just general movements. That's the reason why they're bringing this legislation in.
I think it's all fear driven, isn't it? To you know, they want to make sure that they, you know, it's usually this kind of, you know, the ballot or the bullet kind of thing, and they want to make sure that if people get sick of the sham that's going on in the ballot box at the minute, that they're any kind of direct action that they might take otherwise is put out of reach or certainly made extremely costly in terms of potential consequences and so on. And we've got a question on there from Armageddon Roach. I'm assuming that's not a real name, but if someone believes there might have been a victim of Spycops, who would they contact?
So the best way, I think, to try and establish that is to contact, there's a group called the Undercover Research Group, and they have done some really amazing, groundbreaking work in researching Spycops, but also assisting individuals who think they may have been spied on by an undercover police, an undercover officer. And it's worth having a look at their website. So I'm sure if you go into Google, type in Undercover Research Group, go on their website, either contact them, but they've produced a checklist of things you should look for, because there's a pattern of behavior of undercover officers. So I think that's your first port of call.
Yeah, it's almost like this legislation is trying to provoke us into a reaction. And of course, you know, you mentioned yourself that you are a trade unionist and a proud one, so am I. If ever there was a time to join a trade union, if you don't belong to one yet, for goodness sake, go find the right one to join. The TUC list have a tool on their website where you can find out which would be the best trade union for you to belong to. And obviously, if you're not working, then Uniting the Communities is a very good organisation to be able to exercise your democratic voice.
Absolutely.
Sure. We've got 10 minutes left before we knock off. So, I mean, let's put this into the broader context, because the discussion came up just at the end of it on the podcast last week, mate, about the UK sliding into fascism, and you know the direction that the country's going in terms of this authoritarianism becoming the fashionable thing among politicians, whatever kind of colour of rosette that they wear, and probably as much or more on the Labour benches at the minute than as it is on the Tories. So, I mean, give us your view on that in terms of the broader social context.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people better qualified than me to give a view, but in terms of my personal point of view, I think there's, we've had neoliberalism for a good 20, 30 years, and the state is definitely strengthening how it operates. I don't think we're sliding towards fascism, because the workers' movements in the UK are still very strong, I think. Trade unionism membership actually went up over the course of COVID. And I still think there's a lot of good organising on the ground. But I think what we are seeing is certainly with this government, an authoritarian streak, which they're trying to get away with. But of course, with any whip of counter-revolution, so to speak, there will be a response, I think, to this. So even if the policing bill, which is an extremely worrying piece of legislation, how the police use that could cause an even bigger response. And that's what I'm hoping, particularly in the trade union movement. I think these issues are going to, they will affect maybe the environmental movements and other movements as well. But I think the trade union movement really needs to take this seriously. And I think they are, but it's how we constantly campaign and combat this is crucial over the next period. So yeah, that's my 2 penny worth for what it's worth.
Okay, well, give us just before we finish. I mean, we will knock off early if we're done, but
can I just come in very quickly,
yeah,
Steve?
go ahead, Bonnie.
Just to say, obviously, we spoke before about people that join the police force for the right reasons. Obviously, those people are there, and you shouldn't tar everyone with the brush because some of the people doing it are doing it for the wrong reasons. But this legislation surely must not be wanted by those police officers. And I'm worried that what the net effect of the new legislation will be to drive out the decent ones and leave us with more and more of the ones that want to behave in such an outrageous way.
I think the problem we've got with the police force, I think there needs to be a root and branch overhaul of the police. I think it's for the reasons that you mentioned, Bonnie, with the Sarah Everard case and various other issues as well, and the Spycops inquiry. There's something fundamentally wrong and is going wrong. If we look at the Metropolitan Police, for instance, fundamentally wrong.
They don't investigate retrospectively, so.
and there's that, and look at how they treated, for instance, the parties that the government has had as opposed to ordinary people. There's something fundamentally wrong with the police, and there probably has been for a long, long time. And there needs to be, more community control of the police. That needs to go on. I think the inquiry, as it hopefully uncovers some of the worst excesses of the police, will maybe help move it in that direction in a small way. And I think this platform and other platforms, as the inquiry goes on, I would certainly urge Steve and yourself to get other people to come on. Maybe women, Dave Smith from the Blacklist support group, people who are core participants from the families, the Justice Campaign, certainly to talk about their experience, because I think the most important thing is we keep this dialogue going and we keep making people aware of what is happening in the inquiry and other spaces as well. So, I think I think this is a great format and a great platform to get those kind of discussions going,
Yeah, we certainly will. So last couple of minutes then, the firm you work for is called the Public Interest Law Company, is that right?
Yeah, no, we're called the Public Interest Law Centre. We're a not-for-profit law firm which was set up 5 years ago.
Tell us a little bit about that, and
well, we started off with.
Can people help it if they want to?
Yeah, I mean, our website is www.pilc.org.uk. As I say, we're not for profit. The work that we do is public law, actions against public authorities, and public inquiries. Public law is mainly judicial review challenges to national government and local government over policies. And that can be anything from the closure of a library to issues around potential war crimes. We've got a case with the Metropolitan Police at the moment. And then our actions against public authorities are mainly compensation for unlawful detention, actions against the police, things like that. And obviously we do public inquiries. We're hopefully going to be representing a number of people in the COVID public inquiry, which is coming up. But our priority certainly at the moment is representing people in the undercover police inquiry. So people can visit our website. There is a donate page. If you want to donate a couple of quid, all the best. But we are not for profit. We haven't got managers who run off with tens of thousands of pounds and driving Ferraris and whatever. Just to assure anyone who's watching, I actually drive a push bike. I don't drive a. I don't drive a. And this kitchen, by the way, is not mine. I will live in a council flat, just to reassure people. I'm at a friend's house. So people can visit the website. We're also on Twitter as well, so please like us on that. Our handle is at Public Law Centre. So please contact us there if you've got any more questions. Yeah.
All right, mate. I'm just going to quickly pop that up on the screen there for people to have a look at. But I think we're almost done. Any other last bits and pieces, last points, Bonnie? What were you
someone popped in one of the comments that I saw went past. Important discussion ought to be being shown on the mainstream media, but the bottom line is there's no way we would have the ability to speak our mind on the mainstream media. That's why it's so important we've got our own media. And thank you for everyone who's watching, so that we can get the message out to people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I would just, to people who are watching, just to stay tuned to the undercover policing inquiry. There's a number of websites or organisations that are involved in it. There's the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance, which has a website. But if you put in Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance in Google, you'll get their website. The women who are affected in relationships are organised in a group called Spies Out of Lives, and they have a really good website too. That's really worth visiting and getting involved and showing your support. And then the inquiry itself has a website, which is www.ucpi.org.uk. And it's due to start again on May the 9th, and the opening speeches are going to be on the YouTube platform, so people can actually listen in. But you can actually search documents there which have been uploaded by the inquiry, and they're publicly accessible, so you can get a flavour of some of the things that have been going on. And I'd urge people to do it. It's meant to be a public inquiry, and the more people visit that site will make it a public inquiry, because it really needs to be, people should take the opportunity to look at that website and search through. Yeah.
Super. Just give me that handle again for your Twitter, Paul.
Sorry. It's at Public Law Centre. That's it. Centre spelled CENTRE.
Good. I'll pop that up on there. So that's at Public Law Centre. Is that right?
That's right.
On Twitter. And so do keep up with that. And obviously, if you're in a position to do so, consider giving those guys some support, because they're obviously doing fantastic work. We're just up against our time. So, Paul, thank you ever so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thanks, Bonnie.
And thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks to everybody who's watching this on catch up. And don't forget to spread the word. And again, don't forget to get over to Alexei's podcast as well and give that a follow, because I keep up with every episode. It's informative as well as funny. So make sure you keep up with that. Everybody, really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie.